With that in mind, the U.S. should implement a program of compulsory HIV testing. In terms of resolutional analysis, I think that we know what most of these terms mean. Compulsory is obviously mandatory. We're going to be pretty topical. We're going to be requiring that people take tests. So the criterion for the round is going to be that of net benefits, weight cost versus benefits. So we'll go ahead and get to the harm, which is that of unidentified HIV. Who knew? The A subpoints that in the status quo, there's a considerable number of people who aren't identified as HIV positive, but are factually HIV positive. The number is somewhere around 250,000 people. Obviously, since they haven't been identified, there's no objective number we have to measure this, but that is the best estimate that NGOs and people like that have been able to construct, and I'll get to you once you're out of protected time. So the first argument under this subpoint is that a lot of people fear testing, right? Like, I haven't gone to the dentist in a really long time because I'm afraid of how many cavities I'm going to find. HIV is a lot more scary than that, right? Like, if I'm not going to the dentist because I'm scared, there are a ton of people that are simply afraid to go to the doctor and get tested for HIV, even though they suspect that they might be HIV positive because of the fear that's attributed to that. But before I get on to the second argument here, I'll take a point.
You talk about 250,000 people estimated to have HIV. Are you talking about in the United States?
Yes, in the U.S. Unidentified cases of HIV in the U.S. Sorry, that's not there. The second argument here is going to be that a lot of people simply don't suspect that they could potentially have HIV, right? Like, a lot of us perceive HIV as a disease that affects other people. This was very prevalent back in the 70s and 80s, where people mainly thought that only the homosexual community could get HIV. But in the status quo, even though we've fortunately gotten over that stigma, there's still very much the belief that HIV is a rare disease. It's never going to strike home. It's never going to affect you or someone that you love. However, this is obviously untrue. You can get HIV through transfusions. You can get it through sexual intercourse. You can get it through a lot of ways, and people just might not even suspect that they have it. The third argument here is that there's a lot of stigma against HIV-positive people that stems out of the 70s and 80s. People simply fear being identified as HIV positive because if they're afraid of the way that people will interact with them. If they actually know that they're HIV positive, they're afraid that they'll be stigmatized because people think that they might contract HIV if they interact with them or something like that. These are all very real problems that act as inhibitors to individuals getting tested. The B subpoint then is that people having HIV but not knowing it is both a threat to themselves, obviously, as well as others, because they can spread it to other individuals much more likely if they don't know that they have it. Thus, in the C subpoint, we'll talk about the implications. The first terminal implication here is AIDS. If the carrier is HIV positive, it's possible that they'll eventually develop AIDS. The most critical time to identify HIV is before AIDS comes on, because that's when retroviruses are most effective, and that's when we can actually make sure that we do things like boost their T-cell count in order to resist viruses. We would argue that even if you find out that you have AIDS after you have it, it's always going to be much harder to check back not only the huge amount of pain that individuals experience, but also straight up the risk of death that could occur. So we think that we're going to be saving a lot of people's lives by making sure that they know they have HIV. The second implication here is going to be sexually transmitted HIV. HIV can be transmitted within 3 weeks of contracting it, meaning oftentimes you won't even have symptoms before you can start spreading it, and most of the time those early symptoms are simply similar to the flu. I don't know if anybody in this room has had sex when they have the flu, but you could have had HIV, right? Like, that's basically the situation that a lot of people are in, where they have no clue that they have it, and so they engage in sexual intercourse anyway, oftentimes unprotected. In fact, 3 out of 4 people that contract HIV sexually, their partners didn't know that they had HIV. In other words, neither of them even suspected that it could happen. So it's very prevalent that individuals get HIV in situations where neither of the partners actually were aware that one of them had it. This means that it's very easy for people, if they're not identified as HIV positive, to spread the virus to other people. The terminal implication then would be that a lot of other individuals are going to be affected by AIDS if it develops. But furthermore, if 2 HIV positive individuals have sex with one another, it's more likely that a retrovirus-resistant strain of HIV will develop because of the individual resistances of each individual strain in each person. I think it's called like A, B, C, and D. And so if somebody that's AB has sex with someone that's CD, it's going to be much harder to actually check back the harms of HIV and AIDS. So we think that early detection is paramount. Thus, our plan is that the U.S. federal government will implement a confidential HIV testing program for all Medicaid recipients. The B subpoint here is that it'll be double testing because the test is only 99.5% effective, so you have to run the test twice. In terms of how much this costs, it's about $15 a test, and we want people to be tested once every 3 years at least in order to make sure that it's up to date. This will be done through normal means, and I'll take any questions you have.
Yeah, So this means like the plan means you're going to go and get orally tested? Is that how that works?
Well, I mean, like, you take the quick HIV tests, which are about $50 each. They're 99.5% effective. Do you need more specific information? Like,
How are you going to know? I'm a little curious like how you're enforcing people to take these tests. I see on the street, cops will go, okay?
no, it's Medicaid recipients, meaning that the government has a list of everybody on Medicaid, and they have a database that says if they've had their 3-year checkup or not. In terms of enforcement, like a lot of other conditions for Medicaid, if you don't meet that condition, then there will be a suspension of services until you meet that condition. And like, that's how it gets enforced. All right, solvency. Our first argument on solvency is that Medicaid, as opposed to Medicare, is attributed to low-income individuals that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford health insurance. We feel that these are the individuals that are least likely to get tested in the status quo. This isn't because they are less intelligent or less aware than other people, but simply because when you don't have as much money to go to the doctor, then you're less likely to go and proactively get tested. We think that, therefore, these are the individuals that are most at risk for being subject to unidentified HIV. The second argument here is that since we're testing twice and we're testing every 3 years, we're going to be able to catch most cases of HIV. There will obviously be about like 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 2,000 cases that maybe don't get identified, but we're still getting a very large impact on that level. The third argument here is that early identification means that you can start taking retroviruses, you can start prolonging your life to make sure that, maybe you can live to the end of your natural life, which a lot of people do, but at the very least you can prolong one's life and make sure that you don't start spreading with other people. Finally, we would say that if people are identified as HIV positive, Medicaid does cover their treatment. It's not like they'll be left out in the cold. That's something covered under Medicaid, and they can start getting treated. So we think that this is a very serious problem, and we think the plans are really good.
Okay, then I'll walk really loud. Just so we'll Sorry. Great, you can all hear me. I'm going to do it. I think the problem with the government case, other than the fact that it's only talking about the Medicaid people and increasing a stigma against the poor and the already people in a lower class, is going to be the argument that they're just not topical. Remember, they're talking about this idea. I know, don't worry, it's going to we're making sure that I can pass. But before we even deal with these arguments, we're going to tell you that they don't solve anything. The equipment they're using the wrong test, and even more, they're only going to increase the stigma. It's a good plan. Okay, he makes the argument on this farm emphasis where he says, like, it's the visa thing. Like, we told you that having it and not knowing it makes them a threat, and knowing it makes them easier to fix. I believe there's no link here because there is no cure to AIDS right now, and there's no cure to HIV, which means they're not even solving it. Like, I don't think the plan actually does any solvency. It really makes you test it, which means it really puts you in the status quo. But secondly, I would tell you there's a term here is that it doesn't make it easier to fix. It only makes it easier for people to recognize, which means the government is required by law to actually tell businesses. Businesses have this right to check up on these types of things with people with HIV. We think that's a problem because that only increases the stigma. Even more, he comes with this idea of retro development if they sleep together. But I believe the plan doesn't stop that. Like, don't let them have access to this type of harm. But I'd say even more, like, people are going to know that they actually have it now, and they're just going to be sleeping with other people that have it. Because there is no information that says if you sleep with someone else who has AIDS, you're going to create a retrovirus. All it says is you have AIDS and I have AIDS. Which, between you and me, if you have AIDS, it doesn't take away their sexual desire, which means they're sleeping together, which means I think it only increases it and actually moves to a higher level. I think this impact is extremely offensive to the point where now you have all of the Medicaid people on it, which they tell you are the disenfranchised on many levels, are actually going to be like, it's going to seem like institutional classes, where they're all trying to kill each other off. I'll plan. We'll go to solvency. I'll take the moment on solvency. He makes this argument under most at risk, and how it's going to give them a lot better and stuff. But I would say a critical term is this, but uniquely affecting the poor creates an extra stigma on all these political classes and people who are already disenfranchised. Because now the government, like, people are going to notice that the Medicaid people are we're all getting compulsory tests. It may be a confidential result. People are going to say, hey, you're on Medicaid, you've just been tested for AIDS. I think this creates an extra stigma against them because now all the Medicaid people look like they're diseased as well. We think this extra stigma only disenfranchises even more, and we say it only leads to an extra cycle of they have to get out of it, they can't. This psychological trauma that they're going to be fed into means it's going to be even harder to get jobs because now even if they don't know what the test is, people like when they get hired in business, will be like, well, they were part of Medicare and stuff. Chances are they might have AIDS. I don't want to vote for them. It's this type of like stigma that we think is offensive, but we think plan never actually solves, and plan only promotes all of it.
Do you think most people would rather like not take retroviruses and die, or maybe have a stigma against them?
I think the problem with the stigma is once it's placed upon you, it's the same thing as that. Like I'm not saying spirit murder, but I'm saying you don't even actually need to engage in society because you're treated like the other. Let's talk about I don't think we have to really talk about it. Let's talk about enforcement. Yeah, sure, I know you don't like this, but I think it's important, okay? Enforcement specification of Franklin, okay? And this I think is really relevant. We tell you fiat is the actual, like fiat needs to, from their critical well, to actually have a mechanism of how it's going to be enforced. While they tell you that they're going to be looking at the Medicaid recipients, they don't tell you how they're going to enforce the Medicaid recipients who pay attention to it.
That's verification?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, we told you that there would be a suspension.
Like, we would tell you that on the stuff. I think on the specific, like the suspension of services, like what happens if people still don't want to follow it? Like, even if they don't, like, what if they lie and they've already been checked? I don't think they're following this mechanism. I think people can lie, I think they're still following the curve. But I'd say on Semifinal standards, I think if you look at ground with competitive equity, I would tell you that they're not able to generate offense. We can't really have a mechanism to really occur. But I'd like to tell you, like, I think they're basically the audience all on voters. I think if you can look at fairness, I don't think there are voters. Stigmas. Here's the point is the framework. We tell you fiat is a test of the resolution, and while that is a good test, that there are more things that have to be looked at, which is our second point. We tell you pre-fiat is always going to be greater because it shapes the discourse within our actual lives. As much as fiat tells us whether the test of the resolution is true, pre-fiat tells us how we think and how we feel. So these are the links. The first one is they tell you compulsory testing. Compulsory testing forces them into the actual open. While they do tell you it's confidential, we have to remember that at the same time, people can still find out about this. Confidential testing doesn't mean businesses can't find out whether people have AIDS. No, not right now. But second, I tell you that they're still linking in this stigma position at on his on his B analysis. When he tells you that that they are a threat, and they're a threat to civilization, that's a stigma that we think is going to link to this. But I say the third is they talk about how they can fix it, that they have to be fixed. It doesn't require fixing the disease. Ryan talks about having to fix them. We think that's a real problem. So on C's point, our internal links. I tell you that we have one. It opens the idea for something that's dangerous. Like we say HIV is dangerous, which means now we label them as the problem too, because they have HIV and HIV is a dangerous thing. What's the problem with that? Well, I think they become the disease. I think Foucault makes a lot of analysis in madness and civilization when he talks about the fact that when you label someone or say that they have a disease, you label them as the disease. And it goes a step further, that's what the impacts are. The disease. I've got 4 impacts. The first one is it justifies calling them an illness. We think this is wrong because it otherizes them. They're no longer human, they're the disease of humans. They have to be heard. I think this is dehumanization on face. Like I don't have to do a lot of analysis about that, but I think it's wrong to say that you are the subhuman. But second, I say on the impact level, and this is my second impact, it forces the mindset that you can no longer enter yourself. What this means is you lose your self-autonomy because you are no longer the individual, you are the diseased individual. You are the diseased person. You lose your own autonomy because now you are linked with the HIV disease. You're no longer linked with your own individuality. Now, right now, the third one I tell you is it justifies killing them. Like, let me make this very clear. Michel Foucault makes a joke about, like, when it's common back in the 1700s, when people were claiming someone had leprosy and they didn't know how to fix it, they would stick them on a boat and push them away. Why is this a real problem here? Because it's the same thing. When you claim that someone has AIDS, and look, they're going to try to say they get out of it because it's confidential, but the one where the Medicaid people, like, everyone's going to say, oh, the Medicaid people had to get these testing, they are probably sick and diseased, they're already being treated disenfranchised, only incurring. I think this is just an extra version of the problem. When we say we kill them because they're not human anymore, they're diseased. Remember, we kill them to make the cure. I think a really good analysis, I mean, if they talk about when they bomb, like there's an example in Africa, they bombed the Loma, they had a gas bomb drop on it. Well, it didn't kill people, the point was that you can do whatever you want to fix it. We're saying it's the same kind of mindset, just a step further. I'm going to the force is it becomes they become a standing reserve for what a state wants of them. There's no subject of sovereignty anymore. They are the actual sovereign state. Therefore, the government defines by them anymore. We think this is an expression problem because it's a form of essentialism, which we think is wrong, because people should have the control of their own identity on the voters. We tell you that you can reject policy. The rejection of policy is the first way to stop stigmas. Policies must be made on a good foundation. This means also who's telling people. The problem is we say if you vote on affirmative, it's an affirmation of the implications we've talked about. So I guess our alternative is pretty clear. The problem is their mindset, and it's not a mindset of who they're talking about, it's all the mindset of the plan. And we say resistance comes through solvency, which means you vote for the negative team. I think this is a pretty clear. Diseconomic destruction, basically. Many of the atrocities going on in the United States, like 250,000 people already have these AIDS. The brink right now is that there's already stigma attached to people who have the AIDS. The next one is once employers know that the employees have AIDS, they won't want to hire them, train them, or educate them. internally in us, we tend to plan people now have to be tested through a compulsory vote, which means people are going to want to be looked at. I think the impacts here are pretty clear. I think the only one really go for though is unemployment, which people can no longer get jobs. So already have to try and die into the cycle of poverty, but now they're seeing this disease, it means they'll never get a job to actually get out of it.
Thanks everyone for being here. Let's jump right into the case today. Their first argument they make down at the bottom of that one is that there's no need to cure for AIDS. But that first argument I make here is that you need to know before you can extend your life by using retroviral drugs. So I think we're still getting offense off that. But secondly, we're still getting unmitigated offense off the fact that they're not going to be as likely to spread it to more people in the future once they know about it, which means that we're getting unique offense off that. The next argument here is a term saying that it's easier to recognize that the government's required to tell businesses. My first argument here is that plan solves for it. We say we're implementing a new program that's entirely confidential. They don't give you any specific solvency analysis as to why it's not going to work. I don't think that that's true. So the next argument they make above that is that the plan doesn't solve like sex with other people, or they're just like going to start sleeping with other people who have HIV. Like I think that's just a ridiculous argument. I'm not sure why the fact that someone would have AIDS is like the reason why you're going to make your decision who you're going to sleep with. But I also don't think that they're impacting this argument out or like telling me why this argument matters. So I just think this argument's kind of ridiculous and isn't really impacted. So I don't think that you're going to be bumping it. Let's go down to the solvency. Their term here is that like you're uniquely affecting the poor, which means that you're increasing the stigma and Medicaid-based people. My first argument here is that the vast majority of the time people aren't going to know if they're on Medicare or not. Like it's not like you walk around with a big giant sign on your head saying I'm a Medicare recipient, so I don't think people are even going to know most of the time. It's that I'd say once again, plan solving for this. In the absence of specific analysis on the plank one that says that we're making this confidential, which they don't give you in the LOC, you can't assume that all this information is just being given out to people. And they say the implication so they're not going to get jobs. So I'd say that would be a discriminatory policy for a business to adopt. They can't just not hire people because they have HIV. That would be violating anti-discrimination law. So I think the implication that they're giving you on the solvency is true. I think you can extend the solvency argumentation, and none of these are actually responsive. Their arguments aren't actually responsive to solvency. I think we're winning solvency and the harm pretty cleanly. We're trying to do that only by testing people who know if they have AIDS and stop development of and to actually stop the spread of AIDS in society. Sure.
Okay. You make this comment back on top. We're talking about the AIDS people actually have sleeping with each other, and you say this is ridiculous. Why would someone define who they're having sex with based on whether or not it's disease? But isn't that your normal contention coming out of Ryan's speech? Is they will choose who they're going to sleep with based on the disease? Your doctor tells them not to do that.
Okay, I would say that the doctors tell people not to do that. But our argument isn't that they're going to choose people who have AIDS. Our argument is just that they might not, if they don't know about it, they might sleep with people who have AIDS, that implication will occur. It's not like they're going to make a proactive choice to sleep with people who have AIDS, it's just that a certain percentage of the time they will end up sleeping with people who have AIDS. We're saying it's not a conscious decision, it's just something that happens some of the time. Now let's go to the disadvantage. I think the disadvantage is basically the same in terms of the putting on case, saying that businesses aren't going to hire people, etc., and it's the same as the term they put on the solvency argumentation, so there's nothing unique coming off that. On the ESPAC argumentation, the violation shifts to the fact that they could lie, but I don't think that this is anywhere near substantive enough of a violation or an interpretation for you to vote on this. I think Ryan very clearly tells you what our enforcement is, that they're going to get a suspension of services if they don't actually get this test over. I would say, secondly, that normal means in the Medicaid programs was doctors to fill out records, right? It's not like people are the ones who fill out medical records, doctors do, which means that we're no longer like Loma, we're no longer biting into their violation here. But my next argument is that this is a solvency press, not an enforcement specification press at this point. They're just saying sometimes people might lie. That doesn't mean we don't have enforcement. That just means our enforcement might not work 100% of the time. It's like saying cops won't catch all crimes. It's not a warrant for the position. Government standards say it's necessary for competitive equity, but they never tell you why competitive equity is important. They never warrant why fairness is a voter. They say that we're assuming solvency, but I say we're not assuming solvency. They can make solvency press arguments like people are going to lie. I would view counter standard of reasonability. There's no way for us to tell how deep we're going to need to specify it, like to satisfy them with this position, which means that there's no reason for you to vote on it, and they really do any kind of bright line as to what level of enforcement is necessary. I just don't think this is a developed position. It lists out the voter fairness in like 10 seconds, so there's no reason for you to vote on it. Now let's go to the critique of stigma. On the top of the framework, they say pre-fiat shapes our discourse, but they never give you a warrant as to why that should be the reason why you vote on it. I would say, first of all, you never want to vote on discourse, because I would say that inherently is oppressive towards us. When you're saying you should drop us because of certain discourse we use, I would say that inhibits free speech in debate, which we would never want to do. It's the only way we're able to actually make changes in our ideas, our conception of the world, and to actually to make progress. But I would say the next argument here is that you wouldn't want to vote on discourse. They don't give you the specific internal link between discourse and a warrant for you voting on it. I'd say you could maybe reflect it, write it on your ballot, or make a statement of some form. They never tell you why discourse is going to change anything. My third argument here is that since this is a competitive activity and they're actually going to change anyone's minds or lead to stopping stigma in the real world or anything like that, they're just going to make us mad, and I think it's going to turn back the implications of the critique because it's just going to annoy us when you drop us because of something you may have said. I'm not going to have time. Now let's go to the link. They say a compulsory task force doesn't be open, but I think when they're not giving you any solvency analysis, why confidentiality hasn't solved this back, we're not linking into it. Their second link is that we say that they are the threat. We're not saying that people are the threat, we're saying that the disease is the threat. I think we can make a clear distinction between the two. I don't understand why we have to just assume that people are the threat if they have the disease. The next argument is that we have to fix them. First of all, I don't think we're even making the analysis that we need to fix people. We're simply saying that we want to help them. We want to make sure that they don't end up dying. But secondly, I think that we're going to be outweighing like this link level argumentation by the fact that the only way that these people that they can survive in the future is if we're able to actually identify the disease and treat it. I think the critique is you ultimately reject it when it just consigns people to death based on a lack of knowledge. I'd say that's something you never want to endorse as a judge, just saying, okay, we don't care about them, let them die. So I think you're going to reject the critique on that level. On the internal link here, they say it opens the idea of something that's dangerous. They become the diseases, and it gives you a Foucault reference. I'd say Foucault, specifically in that book, was talking about mental disease and things that we can't actually verify, which is the link towards oppression, not something that we can verify. So I'd say verification means that we don't have that internal link is no longer true. But I would say next, then I would say, then on the implication level, he says it justifies calling them an illness and it's to humanize them on its face. Like there's no warrant for why this is true. He never says why it justifies calling them an illness. I just don't think that he's warranting the implication on that position. His next argument is it forces a mindset of losing yourself. Once again, I don't think this is warranted. He never explains why this is an impact. I think we're always outweighing with the arguments from Case. Keeping people alive is always going to be more important than any of these mindset type arguments they're talking about because it's a prerequisite to any kind of self-actualization or the ability to progress in the real world. Then he says it justifies killing them. He gives the example of leapers, but I'd say that the only reason leapers could be pushed up on a boat and sent out to the middle of the ocean was because those states weren't at all democratic and didn't have things like individual rights and liberties that they needed to respect. So I think this argument becomes functionally irrelevant when it becomes a precondition for abuse for the state to already be oppressive and not care about people's individual rights, which means I don't think we're linking into that application. Then he says that the government is able to define things, but I'd say that if you turn this analysis back against it just by focusing on the state is insufficient. I think there's a lot of ideas in our society as a whole. We can't just blame everything on the government. I think that's externalizing the problem and ignoring how we all need to examine the discourse surrounding HIV or something like that. When they say rejection stops the stigma, you vote after and you affirm the implications. I don't think he's warranting why you're going to vote in this position. But secondly, I'd say rejection is never a sufficient alternative because he's not telling you what the world lights under a negation, what it looks like under a negation, which means you're not going to want to vote in this position.
Going to go with the opposition team at the end of this debate because simply put, creating a stigma on individuals is something that should be rejected, and costing people their jobs is something that's just morally wrong and on a net benefit scale is going to outweigh. Let's go to the economic destruction. The 8 points, the uniqueness that we have over 250,000 people by their own analysis that aren't known right now for having AIDS. He tells you that there's no warrant to this, but I think our warrant is specifically their own analysis, right? Like cross-apply their own analysis here. But my second response is the break that we give you, right? Like the employers don't know that they have AIDS right now, and at the point you out them by giving them forcing them to have this test on Medicare. Like I think that the employers are going to know that they're on Medicare, and especially they can tell this because they'll know their income bracket, right? So we're getting the analysis there. Like the employers are going to know, like this will decrease the likelihood that they're going to see them as a poor investment. So extend the link and extend the impact that says that this will lead to unemployment of like 250,000 people, right? Like that's the significant impact, because without a job, you can't buy things like food or pay for medical attention that's like beyond what the government gives you, which we tell you is inherently wrong and will create suffering. I think that's a legitimate impact. We're winning. Let's get to the case debate. All right, on the first response to the no link to the cures with AIDS, he says, well, people still need to know, but I would still tell you that's not responsive, that they're still not providing the cure, they're not going to get access to this impact. The next argument is that plan solves for it in no specifics, like there's no specific solvency, but our term here is that they don't make it easier for them, like they make it easier for them to recognize the stigma, right? Like they make this easier on two levels. One, that they're all out with Medicaid, but two, that the doctors are going to know, which is the next argument down there, that like the plan stops this from like the retroactively happening. He argues that this is ridiculous and like who they choose, but he says doctors tell the people who they're sleeping with like has AIDS, right? That's really important, because my first response is going to be at the end of this is that links directly into their criticism, right? Like that's creating the stigma. Like the doctors are going to know, and the doctors are going to tell others who they're sleeping with, right? That's a direct link to the case. But my next response is it's still non-responsive to outing the individuals under the Medicaid level, and I still think we're winning that. Like the doctor's talk is increasing the stigma. That's our response there. And our impact to this position means that we're getting the access to the critique, and you're furthering outing like them as an individual, which we're arguing is just morally wrong. And what? Cool. All right, before I go to the spectrum.
Yeah, in terms of the doctor's talk argument, my argument wasn't that they'll tell other people about who has AIDS, it was just that they'll tell them not to sleep with people who have AIDS. Like they'll just tell them that's a bad idea, they shouldn't do it.
All right, well that's fine, but I think our argument is still going to be is that the doctors are still like increasing the discourse of like outing them, like the doctors themselves are going to know, and like they're still going to tell other people. Like under ESPEC, you can extend it the normal means, the second response. There's no offense on this position, so there's no reversibility issue. It's out. Let's go to the critique next week. His first response is that there's no warrant. But I told you that the warrant is because like it shapes like who they are as individuals, right? Like he says that we shouldn't consider it on a post-fiat level. Like we'll extend that. Like we'll take it on the post-fiat level because we're saying it. Our alternative is that it's bad on the post-fiat level. Like the impacts are much worse. He tells you that there's no specific like link to their case, but we give you two. One is that it's all the people like who are getting Medicaid, and secondly, it's the doctors like knowing, right? And the doctors like telling other people, which they're trying to de-link in the POI, but I still think we're at least getting the doctors talk. The next response on it's not a threat, but I tell you that they're uniquely creating these people as a threat when they have to provide a mandatory test for all of them, right? He says his next response is that that this will help the people, but I will tell you it's not helping them when it's forcing them to do it. Volunteer is always better. Like our alternative is volunteer, right? Like we're going back to status quo. We argue that it's better for them to have the voluntary aspect of it than being forced. So his second response is that we outweigh. I would say that no, because you destroy who they are as a person, and you create a further stigmatizing them, and you force them to lose their job. Is like my third response under that. He tells you that like to reject the K, but I would say that you don't want to reject the K at the point we're promoting volunteerism, which is a clear, better alternative. His next response is that it's not true, but I would tell you that first off, that the doctor's link is still happening on this level, and his next argument under the impacts. Let's go there. Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, like your links 2 and 3 were based off like our discourse, like they are the threat. So I'm curious as like what links you have left on criticism.
Yeah, like I think you're giving us another link in your MG, but like remember the link on people will see them on Medicare and see them as poor, right? Like that's our I think our best link, but we have others. I think that one's really good. Like they're still grouping them all in Medicare. So go to the impacts analysis. He only says no warrants, but we're giving you warrants. We're telling you that this justifies calling them a form of illness and subhuman, right? Like this is dehumanizing. He's not responding to this impact. We're getting access to that. We give you the warrant there. Under losing the self-autonomy, like he just says no warrant, but we have the warrant. It's that they're no longer seen as an individual. Tim even gives you examples of how this is taking place. And the third is that this justifies killing like them as a person because it puts them on Medicare. He says that that's the problem. Like it's not happening in democratic states. My first example is like, really? What's taking place at Guantanamo Bay right now, right? Like that's going to be my argument. Like that's happening into a democratic state where we're like subjugating people to subhuman analysis. But my second response is like denying gay marriage is another example of this, right? Like we're seeing this happen on a democratic level, like stigmatizing individuals, especially those who have AIDS. So I think that answers that back. His next turn is that like people were blaming the government, but I would say first off, the government is to blame, but secondly, you're further entrenching that you're justifying the government's action, right? They're justifying it, we're saying that's bad, and they should lose for it. The extended fourth impact that the states are sovereign, I still think we're gaining the access that this bill justifies like killing them. Go to the alternative. What? That was the term I'd say, that we're blaming the government. And I'm saying that no, they're justifying using the government. Okay, on the alternative. They tell you that rejection is never solvency, but I tell you that rejection equals the status quo, and status quo is volunteer, right? Like, we always are going to advocate that creating stigma of individuals is much worse than forcing them to do something. Like, if you have AIDS today, I think our story is going to be pretty clear. Like, you wouldn't want to be forced into making a test, to have a test. So I think any type of solvency they're going to try to argue on case just simply isn't taking place. I think that we're giving you a better story on the criticism level, on the pre-fiat level or post-fiat level, of why their plan is a bad idea, because it uniquely harms people with AIDS by creating a stigma of them as an individual, and we think this is a reason to reject them and vote opposition.
So I'm not gonna lie, I think abstract green and yellow is kind of a little shady, and I blame it on myself. I think we're looking a little fun, and it probably doesn't look like it's coming together. It's okay, it's fully admitted, like I can understand. But I think we're doing a good job collapsing down the positions that we are winning in the offense we actually do in the ground. Well, perceptually, Thomas and Ryan may always look like they're leading. I don't think they're actually answering the line by line. Especially when Thomas's, all of his answers on the criticism are defense. He's either running no links or no warrants. There's not a single offensive answer on, oh, I'm sorry, except for that turn, the state is good. Like, they, that just doesn't really answer the analysis. You're not going to win there. So let's go to my first rule. I've got you. One, voting government gets everyone on Medicaid to be fired or lose their jobs. I don't think he answers the dissat. Wait, I know he doesn't. He concedes it because he's talking about, hey, when the time runs out. Now, I'll grant the dissat doesn't have a lot of analysis to it, but I think it's still gaining us some mileage when they're not responding to it at all. I tell you, silence equals concession, and Griff's pulling it through. Now, I know what Ryan's going to do because Ryan's brilliant. He's going to make cross-applications on case to try and apply them to the dissat. I've got some responses. One, any cross-application is new, right? That's just a new argument. Don't let him cross-apply. But secondly, even more importantly, there is arguments coming off the dissat that are going on in our actual, solvency. What is that? That the uniqueness story coming off the dissat is people and businesses will see they're on Medicare care based on their brackets and stuff, which I've already said. He just gives another example, so don't let them try and make more answers off of this, more examples of analysis if they could have argued in the MG. Our response is simple. They're going to fire them. Or they're just not going to hire them because they're going to think that they have AIDS. He keeps making these answers about discriminatory policies, but it's not answering the line by line. People will still do it. It doesn't matter if it's discriminatory. Like, it can still occur. They might claim it's for different reasons that they fired them, but we're telling you they'll still lose their job, which puts them in a cycle of poverty, which was the impact I got before time ran out. Like, what?
The answer to even though anti-discrimination laws prohibit it, they're still going to do it is you and the yellow orange.
That's Griff's answer. Like, Griff talks with anti-discriminatory policy. He says they'll still do it anyway. Like, I think I'm just kind of like winging it here and talking about it. I don't think there's anything new. I'd ask to take it into consideration. And who gives a crap from the DA? We are totally leaning on my second voter, and that's the criticism. I believe winning government increases the stigma on the disenfranchised. I think we're winning on a post-fiat level on our dissat, but I think when linked with the critique, it makes it a lot stronger. So let's talk about the line by line, why they're losing the critique. Look, we're not going for pre-fiat, okay? It's obvious that we're not pulling that through. Don't let them make offense against it. It's fine. Why? Because the criticism functions on a post-fiat level. Our alternative is post-fiat. Like, we decided this earlier when we said you can reject their plan. He says, I don't know what this looks like. Funny, rejecting plan normally means you vote nay. It doesn't seem very intuitive here to tell you what rejecting looks like. I think Thomas is just flipping answers because he thinks I'm being flippy. Funny though, this is the only place I'm not being flippy, and I'm giving real warrants to our arguments, and it's why we're winning on the critique. I think the second, though, is our perceptual link that we talked about. We tell you that this perceptual link, which is coming and they're never answering, is very clear. What does it mean? It means that these businesses will see that they're on Medicare based on brackets, and they'll see these people are the ones being HIV tested, and that's what will create the stigma. Does Thomas answer it? No. He doesn't do any analysis about this perception. He only says businesses won't know. That doesn't matter. It's not answering our reputation coming out of the LOC, that they will still perceive it, and they will still create a stigma. So, I think on that one, the other analysis that we're getting, like, and I know you guys can call it new, but I don't think it is that he talks about how they have to pay for it, right? They're paying for their own test. I think at the point where they're paying for their own test, like,
Point of clarification, can we do that?
no. I mean, if that's how you guys are going, that's fine. Like, I thought you guys were talking about pay for your own test. I don't really care, we're still going to pay. Go to the impacts, we're still going to win on it. think I have 4 that he's just not answering. He makes this comment about how Foucault is talking about mental and therefore doesn't apply, but he misses all of my Foucault analysis, which says that's where it starts, right? Like, the mental allows the government to start taking control of people. He's not answering that part. He's not answering Foucault's internal analysis about diseases. He's just flipping out at its mental dude. It shouldn't apply. That doesn't answer any of the internal warrants against it. So go to the impacts. The first one. He says there's no warrant to justify calling them an illness. Yes, there is. When you equate that the poor are the ones that have to be attested, you're equating them with the disease. That's what we've been saying from the very beginning. The warrant is so clear. I actually warrant this for crying out loud. Like, if this was speakers, I'd say I should get one. But second, he says there's just no warrant when you talk about forcing their mindset that they're no longer an end to their self. But it's very clear. I think it's coming off our first argument that once they're seen as the disease, and once they're seen as this because that's how the government's labeled, it's well, these people need to be tested for HIV because they could be the disease. Once that's seen, they lose their individual self. The warrant's there is never answering it. The third, though, is completely justifies killing them. He says it's no link because it's done confidential. I don't think this is really answering it. Like, our argument, once again, is it doesn't matter it's confidential. If people perceive they're the disease, you can still enact abuse upon them. It doesn't matter if they were diseased or not. If anything, I think grants us more and it supercharges the killing because we're going to kill people who actually aren't diseased, right? Because they're perceptually seen as disease. Man, my OR is a lot better than the first speech. I'm sorry. We tell you that it becomes a standing reserve for what the state wants them. They lose their own personal sovereignty. He doesn't answer this. He doesn't even say no warranty. So if anything, no warrant. So if anything, we're getting this one above all other things. I think at that point, when you extend it through, it makes something. So let's go ahead and impact. We tell you can reject a policy because it's essentialistic. We tell you can reject it because it's going to justify killing them. We tell you can reject it because everyone's going to create this stigma. He's going to say, what's the stigma mean if they're all healed? That's what Ryan's going to want to say. We tell you it doesn't matter if you're healed because the stigma's upon you. People will no longer look at you the same. I think at the point where they can actually have voluntary testing, they can do it for themselves. They don't need the government to take care of them. They don't need to become their own sovereign. They don't need to be seen as the disease. If they really want to be tested, they can. I think they could have easily talked about education of these people. People can be informed within the status quo. We may not be talking about it, we still think it's a better alternative.
Let's start on the case debate on the harm. The first argument they make in the MO is that doctors telling people not to have sex with other HIV-positive people links into the critique. However, the doctors are simply telling HIV-positive patients not to have sex with other HIV-positive patients. It's medical advice when you're diagnosed. That happens. Their next argument is that doctors are going to out them. There's something called doctor-patient confidentiality. It's illegal. They're not allowed to. That means we're winning the solvency debate on case. They don't go for any of the arguments on solvency in the block. That means that what we're winning out of the round immediately is case, right? We're winning that we're saving people from dying from HIV because, or I mean, we're at least prolonging their lives at the very least. We're stopping people from contracting HIV because people didn't know that they had it. Remember, we're giving you all the numbers about 250,000 people that have HIV but don't know that they have it. We're also telling you that 3 out of 4 people that get it sexually, like their partner didn't know that they had it. That means that the impact that we're getting, that you're weighing against the criticism, which is now on a post-fiat level, is that we're saving people's lives and prolonging people's lives that already have HIV. Now let's go to the criticism. Here's the really easy way you can vote for the government. They can win the dissad, they can win the criticism, go to Thomas's weighing argument on their impacts. They don't respond to it at all. Except he says that saving people's lives outweighs all of their impacts because life is a prerequisite to self-actualization. This is dropped. It's an argument that is granted in the round. Therefore, it would require intervention to overcome our weighing analysis in order to make their impacts more important. This means we're outweighing any impact they access in the round insofar as we're saving life.
This argument that they're actually saving lives from the criticism is new. Like, I think Thomas's response of getting preserves life, maybe makes it last longer, but doesn't cure the disease, doesn't save the life. I think that's where the new argument's coming in.
The rhetoric I have is that keeping people alive is a prerequisite to self-actualization. But even if you don't buy that, let's actually compare the positions on the different. So first, The solvency arguments and the disad arguments were the same. Thomas said that disad is the same as the arguments they're making on solvency, and that is a cross-application. That means that when I extend his responses to their turn on solvency about a stigma against the poor, it does apply to the disad point of order. I mean, if you think it wasn't there, but I'm very sure it was. That means that you can extend that most people don't know that you're on Medicaid, which means that there's no way you can get outed, right? Like, you don't know that you're a Medicaid patient if you just saw someone on the street, which means the only link they're going to get to stigma, since there's doctor-patient confidentiality, is maybe that their employer is going to out them. Extend the argument that discrimination policy is illegal. Sure.
You want to make the claim that the arguments do. Not when you was made, but about whole cross-application and why is that required.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of his case.
That's at least be taken into consideration.
Okay, I think that's all right. Okay, so that means that they're getting very minimal link to stigma, if any, and you would argue that the confidentiality that the case sets up is going to be inaccessible to anybody. There's no way that an employer would know that they actually have HIV. They would just know that they're on Medicaid. But when we tell you, when we're extending the argument, that you wouldn't automatically think that every Medicaid recipient has AIDS, that delinks all of their stigma arguments, that takes out their disadvantage. Now let's talk about the criticism. So now their criticism just has no link. There's no stigma. It's confidential. No one's going to bring it up. No one knows the result of the test. At most, they would just be guessing and have no way to check, right? And insofar as you can extend Thomas's response to the link level, which is that there's confidentiality, that no links the position. But now let's go down to the impact level. All of their impacts have no warrants. In fact, the arguments they say are warrants are just repetitions of the claim. For example, the warrant they provided on their impact is that people aren't seen as an individual. Why aren't they seen as an individual? Is there like some causal mechanism that's causing us to see them as anything different? The only semblance of a warrant they construct is their Foucault warrants, where they say Thomas doesn't have any response but a blip. But Thomas's warrant was that mental diseases are unverifiable, whereas HIV is verifiable. That's the warrant that isn't responded to, which means when you extend that, that means they no longer have any warrant to dehumanization coming out of HIV. They're not accessing any impact out of the criticism, right? We would tell you that insofar as there's no link to the criticism, so no one knows the stigma exists, and they're not telling you anything as to why dehumanization, what dehumanization is, how people begin to no longer be seen as an individual, you'd be having to do a lot of work for them in order to give them the impacts in the first place. I think you need to be doing a lot more work for them to weigh those impacts against the arguments we're getting in the round and constitute opposition power. So, this is how I think the round plays out in the end. I don't think that there's a link to the criticism. I don't think there's any stigma that exists, in which point there's really no offense in the round, right? Like you'd be voting off of the net benefits of case. I think that even if you do think the stigma exists, we're outweighing it for a couple of reasons. The first one is I've done so much work mitigating the number of people that would know who is stigmatized by that any implication that they are getting out of criticism is going to be very small and rare, right? Like even if we grant that occasionally, someone's individuality, might be infringed on a little bit, that's going to happen so little of the time, and they never tell you that that's like a dangerous side constraint on creating plans that it wouldn't matter. Secondly, we're outweighing because of the original argument we made, which is that keeping people alive is always going to be a more net beneficial end than just like having people know they have HIV, right? Like I think at the end of the day, you would rather, have people know you have HIV than just not be able to combat the disease and live a shorter life. Fundamentally, I think that's why you're voting for the government. The plan saves a lot of people's lives and makes sure that fewer people contract HIV. No one to criticism, you can vote down.
All right, congratulations to all. It's a fantastic tournament, and it's fantastic to get to the fantastic semifinal. So congratulations. We do have a unanimous decision. It is a 3-0 decision for Berkeley, so congratulations. I'm going to have some big fat trophies.
There are 2 modes not to first, that's what the Spanish. I think the government says falsify all the answers on the case, and there's 2 of them. The first is that discrimination is illegal, and your answer is that they will discriminate. I think that, like, at best, it's watched, by the way. I think the government employers will know best the impact to stigma is that some people are like, less individualized. They do tell me that life is a prerequisite self-actualization, even though you can stay alive just in case. And I think they're also significantly mitigating your link with their confidentiality argument. Your other ones all rely on their pre-fiat, whatever that means, saying that people have AIDS and that's bad. Those are arguments go away when you say it's post-fiat. So your links are mitigated, which means I don't need to access all their impacts. Plus, they're not particularly well protected. You do kind of appreciate your thoughts.
But you can't say what the warrant is, like Chris kind of like, you know what I mean?
Right. I think you can take a step beyond as like to say that the reason why statement disenfranchised is like something like it is no social acceptance in society and that's the construction itself. That's at least sort of pretty argument for that. It's not my argument, but
I'm pretty similar particularly on the case stuff. Like I think the case stuff. I think the criticism, like I don't know, I think that it's a little bit better warranted than Jim seems to think. And I think that you guys just constantly saying no to everything, probably not the best. I have nothing else to say. I wish I could.
first 35.
But I think that you guys just get into trouble once you can see the impact stuff. Like alternative law, I've been telling people that I get on their criticisms, I think they're conflating pre-post-PI impacts and their criticisms are both post-PI impacts. This time I think you guys are conflating in the other direction. I think most of these impacts are primarily discursive and absent some sort of hyper-specific scenario, virtually impossible to win against a case.
Yeah, I agree with that. All of that. I would just say
For me, one other thing, sorry. Out of the, at the NPDA, when I was like thinking about my ballot, I thought the argument that you had most persuasive for me, but I know probably the future, was this argument about super strengths, people as technical is. Like, they make some answers, but I feel like in terms of positions where you can win a lot of rounds and you can blow up, and I think that's when you can blow up. It's more attractive to me as a judge in terms of like my threshold for being a lower than on your critique, especially for critique having there's a lot to critique.
Yeah, no, I think we can get 18 as opposed to, like you said, we have to end. Like, I guess I wasn't really
On my experience, would it have been more beneficial for us to just go more case arguments?
I mean, it depends on what you want to do. I think I want to defend the proof the argument